Okie dokie. So our next lesson for civil procedure is subject matter jurisdiction. So this topic here can be pretty straightforward. However, if you do not know your definitions, it can be very tough. So let's dive into this subject and how federal courts can have jurisdiction over a defendant. So I wrote an outline here. Our outline really boils down to these four things. We need our general definition of what subject matter jurisdiction means. And then we get into diversity jurisdiction, which boils down to two things: complete diversity and the amount of controversy. Thirdly, we get into federal question. And lastly, we conclude and state why we have come to that conclusion. So remember, we need to substantiate every single thing in this outline. As you can see, it's pretty clear cut. It's not as complicated as personal jurisdiction. You don't have to prove as much. However, this can get hairy. So let's jump into the general definition of subject matter jurisdiction, and then we'll get into diversity and federal question. So the general definition of subject matter jurisdiction is when a federal court has jurisdiction over the subject matter of the lawsuit filed against the defendant. So basically, the plaintiff files a suit in federal district court in whatever jurisdiction he or she may be in, and the federal court has jurisdiction over that specific subject that the plaintiff is suing for. Okay? And to be even more precise, the federal court can have subject matter jurisdiction over the suit by having either diversity jurisdiction or federal question, which is really when the plaintiff's suit arises from federal law, which we'll get into next. Diversity jurisdiction is pretty straightforward. However, it can get pretty hairy, as I said earlier. So the general definition of DJ, diversity jurisdiction, is when the plaintiff and the defendant are domiciled in different state forms and the amount of controversy is over $75,000. You're probably thinking to yourself, what does domiciled mean? So domiciliary means that a person resides, the person lives in a state forum and has the intent to remain or return to that forum. Corporations such as Amazon, Facebook, Tires Plus, whatever, are considered to be domiciled in the state forum where they are incorporated in or where their necessary headquarters is located in. Basically, in other words, their nerve center, which is basically called their headquarters. So we know that Facebook and Apple are incorporated and they have their headquarters in California. So that's where they are domiciled in. That's where they reside. An example of a person being domiciled in the state forum is basically, let's just say that my brother lives in Nevada. Okay? He lives there, he works there, he has a family there. It seems to me in a situation like that my brother would have the intent to remain in the state of Nevada because not only does he live there, he works there and he's raising a family there. Therefore, he's technically domiciled in that state forum. That's an example. Okay? And in a situation like diversity jurisdiction, the plaintiff must ensure that he or she lives in a different state, that he or she is domiciled in a different state than the defendant. That's step one. In step two, the plaintiff must sue the defendant for over $75,000. Okay? Not for 75 grand. It must be over $75,000. So $75,000 and 50 cents will do it. Okay? It just has to be over that limit. I forgot what Congress was thinking in this regard, but that's basically the rule that Congress enacted when diverse jurisdiction was enacted. So remember, for diverse jurisdiction, we need the plaintiff and defendant to be from two different state forums, and for the amount of controversy, to be over $75,000. And domiciliary means that a person has the intent to remain or return to that state forum, and that person resides, that person lives in that state forum. So let's give some critical examples of what diversity jurisdiction really means. So example one, Riley, who is domiciled in Minnesota, remember domiciled means where that person resides and where that person has the intent to remain or return. Riley, who is domiciled in Minnesota, drives to California and gets into a car crash with Wade, who resides in California. Let's say Wade wants to sue Riley in California Federal District Court. Wade can in fact do that because Riley is domiciled in Minnesota and he is domiciled in California. Okay? There is diversity here because Riley does not live in California. He doesn't have the intent to remain in California. Okay? And of course, as we mentioned earlier, the amount of controversy must be well over $75,000. So if Wade wants to sue Riley in federal district court, he must prove that, hey, I am domiciled in California. Riley's domiciled in Minnesota. And I want to sue Riley for $75,000 and 20 cents. That will do it. Okay? That's an example of diversity jurisdiction working out in federal court. Example number two. Donald Trump, who resides in Washington, D.C., gets into a bar fight with Bill Clinton, who resides in Nebraska. Okay? This is a funny example, but this works for diversity because Donald Trump does not live in the same state forum as Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton is domiciled. He resides and has the intent to remain in Nebraska. And Donald Trump resides and has the intent to remain in Washington, D.C. So this works for diversity. And of course, if either or wants to sue each other, they must ensure that the amount of controversy is over $75,000. If it is below $75K or they sue for $75K, this won't work. Okay, it must be over $75,000 and the party must prove that, hey, we live in two different state forums. Okay, although DC is the capital, Donald still does not live in Nebraska. Okay, that is an example of DJ, of diversity jurisdiction. Our last example of DJ would be this. Elon Musk, who resides in California and has his corporation incorporated in Texas, sells a faulty repaired Tesla vehicle to Eric, who resides in Nevada. So in this example, I brought up a corporation because corporations can be tricky. Okay, remember, in situations like corporations, they are technically domiciled in states that they are incorporated in or have their headquarters in. Okay, so in Elon Musk's situation, Eric can sue Elon Musk in California and Texas because Elon Musk is domiciled in California. He has the intent to remain there. He lives there, and he has his corporation, Tesla, incorporated in Texas. Because it's incorporated in Texas, Eric has an option here. He can say to himself, okay, hey, look, I can sue this guy in federal court because I can sue him either in my home state, in Texas, or California because we have diversity here. And how, freaking sticking rich Elon Musk is, Eric will be able to sue for well over 75 grand. So that will work. Okay? But the point of this example is to show that, look, we have options. He can sue in California, Texas, and Nevada, and diversity will still be satisfied. So let's get into federal question. Federal question is actually the most simple thing in this whole presentation, is that the plaintiff's lawsuit must arise from federal statute, not state law. Okay? So the plaintiff must ensure that, hey, I'm suing the defendant for federal law. I'm not suing the defendant for state law. As long as it is for federal statute, it will do, right? The federal court technically will have jurisdiction over the subject matter in the lawsuit. Okay, so no minimum amount acquired in regards to the amount of controversy, right? So remember, in diversity, in DJ, we needed $75,000 or more. Above 75 G's in order for the court to have jurisdiction. However, in federal question, no minimum amount is required. So you can technically sue for $10. And as long as you are suing for federal statute, you're good. An example of this is, let's just say Tucker Carlson was to sue the LAPD for violating his civil rights when he was pulled over in Los Angeles. Let's say Tucker Carlson wanted to visit LA, and while he was visiting LA, he got pulled over, and for whatever reason, Tucker Carlson got his ass kicked because he was resisting arrest. I'm just pretending, but let's say that happened, okay? Technically speaking, if he wanted to, he can sue them in regards to the policeman violating his civil rights, and that would be federal statute, and he could sue them in federal district court. Our second example, which is probably more realistic, is, let's say, Chris Brown. We all know Chris Brown is a famous R&B singer. Therefore, he is a famous person in society. Chris Brown wants to sue Fox News for defamation. In other words, libel, due to Fox writing false claims regarding his career. So Chris Brown would have federal question here because under defamation, if you are a famous person, you have to prove malice. You have to bring up the Constitution in regards to the First Amendment, right? So that's a different story for a different day. But the point is that because Chris Brown is a public figure and he has to sue Fox News for defamation under libel, he will have to bring up federal question. He will have to sue them under federal law. So Chris Brown, if he wants to, he can bring Fox News to federal district court. So to conclude this presentation, federal courts will have subject matter jurisdiction over a defendant if the plaintiff can prove that there is either diversity jurisdiction or federal question, if not both. Remember, in DJ, both parties must be domiciled in different forums, and the amount of controversy must be over 75K. Okay, remember, plaintiff must be from state A, and the defendant must be from state B. If the defendant lives in state A, diversity won't cut it, and the amount of controversy has to be over 75K. If it's under 75K, or if it is 75K, diversity will not be permitted. Basically, the federal court will not have jurisdiction over this case. In federal question, the plaintiff's claim must arise from federal law. If it only arises in state law, then federal question will not be viable here. So the plaintiff must have to rely on diversity. And if diversity doesn't work out, then too bad. The plaintiff must turn to state court. If you have any questions, comment below. Thank you so much.